The population of sub-Saharan Africa will double by 2050, accounting for half of all global population growth. To some, this might simply be an interesting statistic. It might, frankly, feel too geographically distant to put much thought toward. To others, this might be an alarming figure. So many new people in a continent that already lacks the basic human rights like sanitation for so many, the logistics will be Byzantine. There's also a third way to look at this number, and this is a tricky one. People label it using words like opportunity or innovation. This group may see a concentration of bodies and hope that a sheer increase in number of people can be used to change the world, to make things better. But watch out for this one, because the underpinnings of this view of changing demographics in sub-Saharan Africa, not really opportunity at all. At least not for Africans themselves. Exploitation. Colonialism, imperialism, and neoliberalism are probably not the first things that came to mind when you heard that statistic, but maybe they should be. This third group that I'm talking about, the innovation group, is characterized by the two Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In fact, they've made this view into one of their core policy priorities for the next 60 years, the African century. This is essentially the idea that in the coming decades, sub-Saharan Africa will turn into a web of super dynamic economies. The two institutions cite three main reasons that they believe this. The first I've already mentioned, the doubling of sub-Saharan Africa's population. Essentially, they argue that this change in demographics will lead to a rising working age population, which will in turn lead to increased innovation due to a growing pool of human talent, plus Africa's quote-unquote large market size. Second, they cite the increasingly global digital revolution as an opportunity to, and I quote, diffuse knowledge and business opportunities around the region. Lastly, they mention Africa's role in the transition to a global low-carbon economy and other climate change factors. But to really understand the implications of the African century narrative, it's important to back up a bit. Since the 1980s, the Bretton Woods institutions have been characterized by a worldview known as neoliberalism. I'll keep the technical definitional stuff really brief, but it's pretty essential to understand, so here goes. Neoliberalism argues that the state should be limited, but strong, in maintaining private property, and insists on free trade. It relies on, quote, trickle-down economics. This is a term that may bring to mind world leaders of the time, like Ronald Reagan, which asserts that lowering taxes on the wealthy benefits all of society via, you guessed it, a trickle-down effect. In this vein, during the 1980s and 90s, the two Bretton Woods institutions were framed by a program called the Washington Consensus, which promoted free market policies like deregulation, privatization, trade liberalization, and fiscal austerity. They did this by reducing public wages, increasing taxes, and cutting or privatizing social services. This policy of 40 years ago, in case you hadn't picked up on it, is quite literally just neoliberal development models given a more catchy title. Okay, with this in mind, I want to give you a minute to read these two quotes. What sense do these quotes give you? Pretty clearly about neoliberalism, right? Or maybe from the Washington Consensus? Actually, these quotes aren't from either of those sources. They're printed right on the IMF's website detailing the goals of the African century. I gave you this technical history lesson because it's happening again. The African century is, once again, neoliberalism under a new name. I want to briefly show how this key point, that the African century is just neoliberalism renamed, is made clear in a case study of one country currently in the crosshairs of the African century program, which was also dramatically affected by the Washington Consensus some 30 years ago. Neoliberalism spread to the Democratic Republic of Congo in the wake of the Cold War, wreaked havoc on one of its main industries, small-scale artisanal mining. The Washington Consensus' emphasis on privatization, deregulation, and the supposed superiority of free market capitalism led to mining reforms, privileging international trade over local markets. While Congolese mine workers had traditionally followed local customs and traditional law in performing their trade, with the onset of neoliberalism, they were suddenly thrown into the world of formal export regulations. They couldn't compete on such a global scale, and as a result were not only displaced from their local jobs, but also lacked the skills to find work at large-scale companies that had replaced their previously artisanal profession. This drove unemployment up and, as a result, created a surge in poverty. Foreign intervention in the name of neoliberalism, from the 1980s up until today with the African century narrative, has allowed foreign interests to take precedence over the interests and needs of local communities within the DRC. Neoliberal policies proposed by the Bretton Woods institutions have for years unevenly favored those already at the top of society, exacerbating the gap between them and the marginalized. So how can sustainable, successful, equal, and human-centric development occur in sub-Saharan Africa? I'd like to propose that there are two solutions. Maybe optimistic at best and far-fetched at worst, but solutions nonetheless to decolonize and de-neoliberalize development in sub-Saharan Africa. The first option is to change the way that the Bretton Woods institutions are run and who they include. Currently, they are run by the US and EU countries almost exclusively, and as a result, these countries hold nearly sole decision-making power. Currently, any Africans included in the organizations are the political elite and often the corrupt who have little knowledge of or care for the day to day lives and struggles of most Africans affected by things like civil wars and resource extraction. They're the ones who deserve a seat at the table. My second option to propose, and probably the more utopian idealistic one, is the following. Not until development is allowed to happen from the bottom up, when local problems can be faced with local solutions rather than by institutions with A, no knowledge of the areas in which they're intervening, and B, opportunity to profit off of the policies they create, can sub-Saharan Africa truly, as these institutions themselves like to say, live up to its potential. Until then, the very institutions claiming to be committed to sub-Saharan Africa's well-being will be the reason behind its failure to thrive. Thank you very much. Here are my references.